Well, I'd like to introduce Professor Erran Carmel. He's a professor of technology management. He is the former dean, and he's also a futurist. He was one of the early writers on the globalization of technology work, and he teaches at the American University of Washington, D.C. He has a great list of panelists that are also part of it, and we look forward to having this discussion. And over to you, Mr. Carmel, or Professor Carmel.
Good afternoon from Washington, D.C. It's great to see all of you. We're going to be exploring the future, the four of us. We'll go in the following order. First, Victor Motti, then Anir Boras, and third will be myself, Erran Carmel, and then fourth to wrap it up will be Daniel Silva. So if you are interested in catching a specific person, it's MBCS will be the acronym. So here's how we're organizing this. We're going to start in really expansive mode, blowing your mind with Victor Motti. He's going to start and really take you on a trip as a futurist. And then Nir Burras will expand your mind with 3 scenarios of the future. And then I will try to structure your mind as a futurist. And then Daniel Silva will wrap it up with some comments. And so with that, I'm going to hand it over to Victor Motti. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much for the introduction, Professor Carmel. I'm very happy to join you today. And let me begin by sharing my screen with you and the participants. The topic of my talk today is about drivers of change and lifestyle in 2050, which is characterized by a decentralized and autonomous futurescape. I am director of the World Futures Studies Federation, WFSF. This federation was established in Paris in 1973 and is one of the leading organizations primarily focused on expansion and promotion and further development of futures studies as a discipline or an academic discipline to study the long-term big picture and radical change. Well, the art and science of futures studies actually help us obtain a better understanding of the drivers of change by focusing on long-term big picture and radical change. These 3 elements are actually the motto written in the logo of the Federation. For example, you can see what is happening according to technological revolutions like biohacking plus artificial intelligence, or social upheavals like massive access to free educations or massive access to tools of production. In the digital age, everybody who has a cell phone can actually become a producer of very profitable series of content, for example. Other kinds of radical change could be named like business disruptions, for example, end of brick and mortar banking, which we are experiencing right now, or other major transformations like a post-plastic society. Drivers of change are actually factors that are causing change, affecting or shaping the futures. And the futures here, the plural word futures, is an indication of the primary focus of the professional futures, which is about alternative multiple futures, not only a forecasted future or the most probable future. Some drivers of change can be listed, such as data revolution or clean energy or automation or silver tsunami. Let me just briefly review these for you. One of the drivers of change, of course, is data. In this comparison, you can see that in January 1, 2007, the market capitalization of the top organizations was seen in banks, Citigroup, Bank of America, ICBC, HSBC, and these numbers are actually the market capitalization in terms of billions of US dollar. But after a decade, in January 2017, you see that Apple, Alphabet, Amazon, these companies are taking the place of the previous leading companies or banks in terms of their market capitalization. And this actually shows us that the landscape or the business environment is changing, is the drivers of change, or data is shifting the place of top ranking organizations in terms of the business environment. Other drivers of change are like clean energy. For example, in the horizon of 2050, 139 countries are aiming for a 100% shift to renewable source of energy. And this could create almost 52 million jobs, despite the fact that because of this shift from fossil fuel energies to clean energy, we might lose almost 27 million jobs. But this is actually a very important driver of change because it's going to change a lot of things about our lifestyle, about our urban planning, which is the topic of this conference, and other things as well. Another driver of change is, of course, automation. There are lots of books and reports about the impact of automation on some jobs becoming obsolete or some new jobs going to take their place. But according to the most conservative estimates, we might expect that doctors, surgeons, police officers, teachers, journalists, investment analysts, fund managers, lawyers, drivers, mechanics, travel agents, even construction workers or project managers could be replaced by algorithms, by AI, by automation. Another driver of change is the global aging. And sometimes people refer to it using the metaphor of a silver tsunami, referring to the gray hair on people who are older or senior people in the society. And these are infographics showing that according to data by the WHO or World Health Organization, in 2050, this is the map of the globe, which shows that how many countries have more than 30% or more 60 years old or older. Or if you look at the horizon between 1950 or 2100, you see that the birth per woman is declining, and it's approaching all over the continents across the world to almost 2 children per woman. A few years ago, one global survey of experts on society and lifestyle in the horizon of 2050 was carried out by the Institute for Global Environmental Strategies. And the conclusion of that report was that a decentralized and autonomous landscape, or future escape, as we might like to call it, is emerging on the horizon. The expert sample of the survey were selected from the leading journals or academic journals in futures and foresight. And they were actually looking at different areas of interest, and the most relevant to this conference today was consumption of food and manufactured goods and infrastructure, in particular housing and mobility. Let me just review some of the key points about this survey. As I told you, the survey was done with leading authors in different journals like Journal of Futures Studies, Technological Forecasting, and Social Change, etc. But one of the conclusions in the section of consumption is about the change of dietary habits, like people begin to eat insects or using cultured meat or artificial meat, becoming more in favor of vegetarian and vegan diets. And the driver of these shifts is actually is due to food scarcity and the necessity to reduce environmental impact of food consumption. And sometimes this is also about the voluntary choice due to health and environmental concerns. And in brief, the authors of this report concluded that the accessibility of high carbon and resource intensive diets such as red meat is into question in the decades to come. And in addition to that, in urban areas, people could become more self-sufficient in producing through roof gardens, greenhouses, algae production, underground mushroom farming. And if you look up into internet, you see that there will be pink farms using artificial lighting of vegetables to produce the food necessary for people. And of course, the cultured meat, or sometimes they call it pure meats. And you can imagine these changes, how can they have a great impact on the design of the cities of the future. Another important conclusion was about the manufactured goods. And there is a shift occurring in the direction of more sharing and the adoption of the 3R activities, which are repair, reuse, and recycle. And of course, in addition to that, you are going to see more experience-based consumption. People do not like necessarily to buy stuff, but to have experience of having stuff and using that stuff. Production patterns also changes. It's shifting toward more localized and smaller places or a smaller scale in a position to large factories or large manufacturing facilities. And they will become more environmentally conscious in product design and material use.
Dr.
For example,
Motti, if you could, we're over time a little bit, so thank you.
Okay, I just want to conclude, if you allow me.
Yes, of course.
Okay, and of course there is a conclusion about mobility and housing. Mobility is about seen as a mobility as a service, as a sharing platform. And housing is also about using the design principles to prepare for extreme weather conditions and changing into smaller units and smaller living spaces. And of course, providing outdoor social amenities to reduce car dependence. These were most of the most important conclusions of that report, and I hope that this could provide some input for further discussion today. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Motti. That was very interesting and very mind-blowing, as a good futurist should do at the opening of a future panel. So thank you for that. And with that, I hand it over to Mr. Burras. We cannot hear you. Are you there, Nir?
Okay. Do you see me? Do you see my shared screen?
We see your shared screen, yes. We can't see you, though.
Oh, I don't know where to turn me on. Hold on. Start my video. Okay, thank you very much. Could you please give me a 1-minute warning before my time's up?
Yes.
Okay, thank you very much, all. In the process of writing the Art of Classic Planning, I asked, like, who, you know, here are all these great ideas that used to work in the past. how are we going to apply them in the future? What is there in the future? What are the futurists saying about the future? So I dug into that a little bit. And after having read everything and absorbed everything, I realized that those who do not know their future, their past, have no future. And this is my fundamental statement to those who are really happy with technology and smart and everything else. I doubt that it's going to work. And the interesting thing is that history teaches us that we've been here before. And by that I mean that there has been previously an AI level technological revolution in history, and that was the introduction of iron, which enabled people to kill so many other people that they didn't know what to do with the bodies. It was embarrassing. So they took them prisoner and made them prisoner of war, and enslaved them for 2,000 years, from 1000 BC to 1000 AD. 80% of people were slaves. And this is kind of the picture that the AI thing is giving us. So when we're talking about urban futures, and here's kind of the key point, the future that people are saying that we're going to have 90% of all folks living in cities by the end of the century. So a futurist asked me last year, what's the future of futurism? I said, it's urbanism. So here specifically in TAG, this is why we're here. And this as well, this is little town of Aarhus, which grew 7 times in population between 1900 and 2020, but 25 times in area. And you can't convince me that this has anything to do with efficiency or progress, or I don't get it. So basically addressing the, looking at this thing from the standpoint of the book, I realized that we already have climate change, we have decline of democracy, we have pandemics, we are up to our noses in the future already. So the futurists are saying that we have 3 directions to go: high-tech city, feral city, and muddling through. This is the notion of the high-tech city. Everything is interconnected, using a lot of energy to do so. And at some level, it kind of looks nice, like this greenhouse on top of London and so on and so forth. But you all realize that this in 5 years is going to leak like a sieve, and it's going to have to come down or be replaced. So it's clear to us that our idea of the future, which started over here with, this is from the movie Metropolis, and then you have all read H.G. Wells's notions of the future. And some of you maybe, Jules Verne, he wrote something about Paris in 1963, I think it was his date. And he had fax machines and really weird socio-cultural stuff and so on and so forth. The futurists say there's about a 5% chance of that ever happening. They say that there's a 35% chance of this. And we already are in it in many places in the world. I think this is in Jakarta. This is in Africa. This is an operating train. This is what it looks like, and this is what it will or might look like in a feral kind of environment. And this is what it looked like in Hong Kong, in the walled city of Hong Kong. What remains of it today is this park that was developed immediately before all this was taken down. So muddling through, they say that we have a 65% chance of muddling through. What's that going to look like? So it's not the first time we're muddling through. Rome muddled through. The walls of Rome used to be filled with 1 million people, and by the 15th century, you had about 20,000 people living there, 30,000, on a good day. Here, this is St. Peter's before, and Castello San Angelo, and so on and so forth, Trastevere. It was empty, and you had fields in there. And to this day, there's a lot of empty space in Rome. This is what it looked like in the 16th century. And guess what? We have another example of something like that. Angkor Wat, 1 million people in a place which today hosts a handful of monks, in fact, and a lot of tourists who come by to see it. And then we have Detroit, which started out like this on the right, went to what we see in the middle, and now is what we see throughout everything. So I am thinking we are in a process of some sort. We're in a cycle of some sort. There is some sort of a long-term urban cycle. And just to give you a sample of a place that is living it, in Havana, you have these really beautiful areas that are maintained by their fingernails. People are holding on to them while other places are already collapsed into whatever they are. But we know that the culture there is fundamentally urban, it's urbane, and the city will come back in the most beautiful way. So one of the things that we learned in and courtesy of the modernist movement is that problem solving is like walking into the future backwards. You know, when you're problem solving, you're facing a problem that is in the past. You defined it in the past, and you all the time have it in the back of your head as you move forward. So it's like moving into the future with your back to it. The gift of our time is that we can actually talk about all these things in a forum like this. It could not have happened 20 years ago, 30 years ago. It simply didn't exist in this kind of a fashion, and not 100 years ago either. The point is that we have been building cities for over 5,000 years, but we've been living intensively with technology for only 200. And I want to propose that we simply have no idea what to do with it. It's as simple as that. And the problems are many, because running after the adolescent hackers who run the world today, like Mr. Gates and Mr. Bezos and so on and so forth, you know, that's not the future. And you see Mr. Gates trying to wrap his mind around life, and he still is a linear thinker because he's a programmer. So we can't let the programmers lead us in any way. On the contrary, we actually need to aspirationally create human machine rules. And you'll see that rule number 1 is all human transformations, material transformations must be done by humans. So no more of this, what we're using here, for example, and I apologize for doing so, like the survey is not done by a human being asking you what it is. We are using the technology. And in this case, it's sort of a low grade level of it. Rule number 2, humans may employ a tool, a machine, in executing rule 1. There's no limit. There's no reason that we shouldn't support any technology. But the question is, what do we do with it? How do we do with it? So we have to have people, individuals, living people, responsible for machinery at all times. This is like the same kind of safety rules you have for heavy machinery, for nuclear devices, for bio weapons, for driving a car. You have rules for how to do that. We need that also for human machine rules. I'm not going to get into it. There are places that can absorb them and so on and so forth.
Mr. Burris, 1 minute.
Thank you very, very much. I'll take my time here just a second to get organized. I'm nearly at the end. Ladies and gentlemen, humans have had plagues prior. This is not the first time we have a plague and we're living in a plague. Fortunately, we can talk about the other plagues. This is in Tours in France. A friend of mine, an archaeologist, dug this up and sent me a picture. But this doesn't come alone. It comes with this. Ladies and gentlemen, this is a plague redemption church in Venice. You see the people are socially distanced. You see that on the street side, the rhythms of the buildings provide the architectural rhythm necessary to inform, to give people cues in the street for social distancing. You see that for the most part, the people on the gondolieri are socially distanced. But what you really see here is a higher level thinking. And I believe that where we're at right now is going to lead to that. I believe that one of the results of TAG is going to be that we're going to recognize that the purpose of urbanism is to create a legacy of beautiful places. I want to thank you for this little opportunity, for this great opportunity to share with you some of the things I discovered on the way in the last couple of years. And anybody who's got a copy of my book, text me or preferably email me with your address, and I'll send you a signed bookplate so you can have a signed copy. With questions or anything else, just contact us at cgiclassicplanning.com. Thank you very, very much, Professor Carmel.
Thank you, Dr. Burras. That was wonderful. All right, so I will share my screen here. And can you see my screen, the 5-dimensional space? Not yet.
Yes.
Yes, thank you, Diane. All right, so I will greet you from Washington, D.C., which is a classical planning kind of city. I'm going to talk about the 5-dimensional space of the future of work. Now, I like the progression that we've done here, the three of us. Mr. Motti did the traditional way to start to talk about the future. He talked about the drivers and the trends and gave us a lot of data. And Dr. Burras talked about his 3 scenarios, which are quite different. And I'm going to continue to talk about scenarios, and let me set it up for you. So you are seeing my slides, yes? The 5-dimensional space?
Yes, I can see them.
Good, all right. So the professional futurists don't predict the future, but rather build a number of different futures. And that's why that word future has an S there for plural. And these futures are often framed from dichotomous dimensions. And that's what I'm going to walk you towards. And they're presented as scenarios. And a scenario is a creative work or fiction. It's a story of facts, yes, but it's creative and it's not a prediction. It's a what if story that opens up our minds and creates dialogue with the stakeholders. Now, a little bit of the setting here. In this discussion of the future of work, myself and Professor Sawyer, who was mentioned on the first slide, we're focusing on knowledge work, the kind of work that we typically do these days in offices and in homes with screens, and we're not talking about manufacturing or shops and so on. Now, this is useful when we think about scenarios. This is called the futures cone. And what you see here, let me give you a little bit of an orientation, is the time scale on the bottom. And so you see the time at the bottom. We're here now. This is the current time. And as we get further and further into the future, the cone opens up because we know less and less about what will happen in the future. The most likely future is here in the bullseye in the middle. That's the projected future or the probable future. Notice that all of them begin with a P. That's to make it nice and cute and nice and memorable. As we get further from the future, the scenarios that we build, which are all around here, get less and less likely as we get out into the future cone. Now, you architects and urbanists, you like to play in the green area here, which is the preferable future. Especially in my discussions and debates with Dr. Burras, that's his area here. But I want to take you into the entire future code here, which includes both the probable and the possible. All right, so with my colleague, we came up with 5 dimensions to frame the futures of work, and that's what I'll present to you very briefly. We did a very thorough literature review in the academic literature, the futures literature, the management literature, the socio-technical literature. And these are the 5 foundational dimensions that we came up with to structure dialogue with stakeholders. The first is work arrangements, virtuality versus compressed future. Now, virtuality, you know well, we've been thrown into virtuality now in the last 12 months because of the pandemic. The second is the structure of work. atomistic versus holistic. So atomistic is the notion of the future as the gig economy. We'll all be working for TaskRabbit and Mechanical Turk. The third dimension is the locus of decision making. Who makes decisions? Is it man or is it machine? Coming back to Dr. Burris. So it's algorithmic, which is essentially artificial intelligence, versus human-centered. The fourth dimension is what our markets will look like. Are they the neoliberal markets, which are the capitalists, everything is about competition? Or are we talking about some kind of safety net capitalism? And the final one that we structured is really about the meaning of work. So it's Übermensch versus nihilists. So Übermensch have a higher aspirations, higher goals. They find meaning in work, while nihilists don't find meaning in life, and let alone in work. And in fact, in many of the surveys, what we know about workers in the office environment is that most of them do not find meaning in their work. Those are the 5 dimensions. Now, what do we do with those 5 dimensions? If we could see, we human beings, in 5-dimensional space, we would structure a 5-dimensional object of some kind, but we can only see in 2 dimensions. So we took dimension 1 and 2 and we created a 2x2 here. And what we do as futurists is we create these future scenarios, back to scenarios, using those dimensions, those dichotomous dimensions. We give them very cute names and nice short descriptions. And we use those future scenarios as starting points for dialogue with our stakeholders. And that's why these 5 dimensions are useful as the future of work. I thank you very much. And with that, I'll hand it over to the 4th and last panelist, Mr. Silva. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Professor Carmel, for the opportunity to share some notes and thoughts about the preferable, probable, and possible future of urban development. And I will start with some context. The world around us is changing with several complex, interconnected global factors currently at play, altering the way we interact with each other and the world around us. Since the Industrial Revolution, the world population growth rate has risen dramatically. In the past 130 years, the world has grown by 1 billion people. And we are also beginning to see the effects of our rapidly changing climate. The planet's average surface temperature has risen about 1.62 degrees Fahrenheit since the late 19th century. Most of this warming has occurred in the past 35 years, resulting in a demonstrable increase in global heat waves, heavy rain, and droughts. So following are the design challenges that the cities will have to overcome in the future and the barriers that need to be addressed: cleanliness, overpopulation, congestion, sustainability, security, not in that particular order. Cleanliness, maintaining a clean city is good for the community, the environment, the economy. If a city is not well maintained, it can lead to an influx of pests, soil and water contamination, and damage to tourism. Not doing so can also contribute to the rise of crime and anti-social behavior. Population growth. As of last year, the world population now stands at a staggering 8 or so billion people, half of which live in an urban setting, and by 2050, 2/3 of the world population will be living in cities. Such population density will exacerbate problems around poor air and water quality, insufficient water availability, waste disposal problems, and high energy consumption. Congestion. Another consequence of overpopulation is traffic congestion, whether due to insufficient provision of public transport, cultural attitudes towards transportations, many cities around the world are already facing huge issues with congestion. Currently, cities are responsible for 70% of global CO2 emissions. As a result, architects and planners will have a key role to play in combating climate change, with most of them citing this as the biggest issue the city of the future needs to address. And finally, security. Recent years have seen rising geopolitical tensions among the world's major powers and growing instability. These intense pressures are presenting a host of new challenges for those responsible for designing and maintaining our public spaces, including local authorities, urban planners, and architects. So we've collected a few urban planning trends that, of the essence right now that could help at alleviate some of these issues and challenges that we've just mentioned. And creating innovation districts, for example. Innovation districts are characterized by 2 or more anchor locations, such as universities, hospitals, research centers. Distributed throughout, innovation districts are also offices, retail, dining, and open green spaces with a specific focus on a variety of transportation options, often favoring mass transit over cars. Think of it as a massive regional shopping mall, but for ideas and creativity. So that's sort of the innovation districts concept. The other concept are the blue zones. Another approach to urban development promotes healthy living and longevity through a variety of design practices. So blue zone principles represent good planning and can be incorporated into urban designs with little effort. Outline 6 principles: engage in moderate and regular physical activity, have a life purpose with meaningful activity throughout life, reduce stress, have a moderate caloric intake consisting of a plant-based diet. Alcohol may be consumed, but with moderation, and engage in family life, social life, and spirituality/religion. So walkable environments to reduce the need for cars, increase vertical density and mixed use diversity to encourage walking, a mix of housing options to encourage a multi-generational population, a mix of development types beyond residential and office spaces, local gathering places, parks and plaza, locally owned farm-to-table restaurants. So we are trying to reduce the footprint of this overpopulation, and that continues to increase. And finally, another approach is the eco-districts. The eco-districts fuse sustainable development principles with urban planning to reduce the ecological footprint of a development. Essentially, a large-scale application of low-impact development. So in eco-districts, you have the following principles: multimodality, water conservation, alternative energy, health, building materials. So we have to avoid the use of hazardous material, daylight equity, and aesthetics, which we find in the classic planning concept. So this all
Silva, if you could wrap up, thank you.
Yes, it's cool, blue, and green. It's not necessary for each of these design principles to be distinct and separate. Envision an innovation district that also incorporates the blue zone and eco-district design principles. Think of it as a Venn diagram with 3 overlapping circles moving closer and closer towards each other. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Silva. And now I really want to get in the last 15 to 20 minutes of participation for the audience. And you don't necessarily have to ask us questions. You can also just speculate about the future.
I think Mr. Van Tuyl wanted to say something.
Oh, I can share a few thoughts that are going through my mind. My background is more in food production, so I work in greenhouse horticulture, and yeah, obviously technology is very important there, especially with intensification, and the idea of producing food locally means you want to be efficient for your land use. I'm just trying to think how to reconcile these visions, perhaps. But yeah, that's the background I'm coming from as well. That's something that I think would be interesting to bring up. Yeah.
Well, if I could just quickly respond, I think the essence of being a good futurist is that we can't reconcile the futures because we don't know what the future will be. And so you have to feel comfortable with ambiguity about the future.
Yeah, fair enough. Yeah, yeah.
The question is, what is meant by ambiguity? Because all thinking is driven by the algorithms and values and beliefs of the folks thinking the thoughts. Mr. Kunstler, James Howard Kunstler, wrote his World Made by Hand. And it's clear to us that what we're doing these days is not sustainable, period. So my question is the same type of thinking that led to this unsustainable type of situation going to get us out of it? Now, we know that we don't see that in planning, because the modernist planning that we see continuing to put patch on patch on patch, you got green, you have all smart, you have all kinds of patches for different things. All they really do is they decorate, they gild the lily of failure, basically. So what I am thinking is that, yes, we probably do need new paradigms in likely almost everything. That if you look back at our history, the paradigms we're using today emerged from 200 years of technology. World War I, we're still not out of the echoes of World War I culturally and mentally as nations. And maybe we really need to do a really good rethink, because we had periods in which the thinking was genuinely more holistic, like between 1550 and 1750. And then it became, what happened? There was some kind of a split in the thinking that brought us to 1800, the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, where the thinking, the romantic thinking, which had been holistic before, gave the body to science and the soul back to religion. So today what we have is ISIS and Large Hadron Collider. So that worked. That aspiration worked. I'm wondering whether we don't need to come from an aspirational standpoint. And just to give one successful example of that, the founding documents of the United States are aspirational documents. They're based on truths. We hold these truths to be self-evident. And classic planners hold truths to be self-evident. And they have to do with humanity and what it means to be a human. So, yes, I agree with Professor Carmel, and I agree with Mr. Silva that the things are like a Venn diagram coming closer together one way or another. And I would like to see the human part of the future made stronger, as we saw in the student session before.
I suppose, like, what are the timeless things that are going to remain with all the new technologies? Something like that. You know, looking from the way you're framing it with, yeah, the timeless, with all these new things that are being introduced so rapidly. What will remain the same, or what should remain the same? You know?
So person number, this is from the future. Person number 731976, whoever that is, and I'm sure that's a very honorable and wonderful person, recommended that we read C.S. Lewis, The Hideous Strength. Anybody have a comment on that? Don't all speak together.
Give us more context about that comment.
That's what it said. Recommended reading dash C.S. Lewis. He's the person who wrote the Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. The Hideous Strength. Has anybody here read C.S. Lewis's The Hideous Strength?
So
I've never heard of it. Sorry.
maybe
Okay.
we can try another point of discussion, which is that so I'm an architect or a futurist. As you saw, I'm a business and technology professor, and one of the things that struck me about Victor Motti's presentation is that topic that we'll have an aging world in 20, 30 years. A third of us will be over 65 within a generation. Now, what does that? So that's not maybe. That's almost certainty. How does that affect your thinking?
Well, guys, I don't know what age is. I actually have no real understanding of the concept. The chronological age is, you know, time doesn't exist actually. So attaching a chronological number to myself is like a tattoo of some sort. So I really don't understand it. However, I can tell you what they did apparently in New Guinea at some point. The young people were expected to marry twice in their life. The first person they were to marry was someone substantially older to show them the ways of the world. And the second person, somebody substantially younger, who would, they would train for the world. And, you know, what we are used to is not what is, and not the only what is or has been or all that kind of stuff. We have to look at things from the standpoint of history. We've been here before. We've had times when fear ruled the world. We've had times when there was less fear that ruled the world. They were actually very brief times, but I can say that yes, there was a great deal of fear in the classical world because somebody could come and kill you and somebody could do all that, but there wasn't an institutionalized notion of fear like we have in some of our belief systems. So that institutionalized notion of fear changed. You see, day-to-day life between 60 BC and 600 BC, or 500 BC and 1500, I'm sorry, AD, all these are AD, 500 AD and 1500, daily life for the average person really wasn't that different. And many of the things, the stuff they had around wasn't that different in everyday life. The experience wasn't that different. And we know that because the entire Dark Ages, so-called, and Middle Ages were heavily based on legal systems. Every catastrophe of the Dark Ages was based on some, every Viking raid was based on, had a legal basis to it. They were profound. They thought they continued Rome. They didn't realize they hadn't. So I'm thinking that we live in a world, the illusion is not the virtuality. The illusion is thinking that we have anything. And we are in a dark age because we're printing less. So there's going to be less record. the digital actually doesn't offer a record. And that's one of the reasons for the Classic Planning Institute, in that we are about stewarding knowledge, and we expect to build libraries, 2 on each continent, of the maybe 5,000 books that comprise actually what humans have figured out works in this world. You know, you go into the library at Notre Dame, it's a fabulous architecture library. It has Leon Creer's collection, but all the books, old, new, whatever, whenever they were written, are there based on some kind of a wonderful organizing system. Bravo. But if you took just the books of stuff that actually you know for sure has worked, put them together in a room, you wouldn't have 5,000 books. I don't know if you'd have 1,000. Thomas Jefferson had 26,000 books in his library. So I think we need to more seriously take where we are and understand that the toys we're playing with, including this beautiful Zoom toy, is just a toy. And by the way, the word toy originates in the word tool. A toy is a baby tool. Thank you.
I wanted to address that topic through the blue zone approach for urban development. And somehow one of the principles touch on the promotion of encouraging multi-generational population. And somehow, if we are talking about that within the next 30 years or so, that most or a good portion of the population will be 65 and over, it is encouraged in the blue zone approach to have other generations mixed and blend with those 65 and over to promote healthy living and longevity, for that matter.
That's a beautiful point. And if you know, once we read our history, we find out that most people who were living throughout all of history, who were living our kind of life, urban, intellectual, a little bit of nature, trying to look after themselves, not out there, you know, and engaged in war and killing each other. There were those too. And certainly not the ones who were not taken care of by others because they were actually enslaved at the time, or not. And again, this slavery in the old days was not the same as American slavery. American slavery is very different from the slavery that happened in antiquity. The American slavery is truly horrific. Slavery in antiquity ran the full gamut from, by appearances, total freedom, to by appearances working in a galley. But the majority of the folks lived some kind of a more or less normal life. The middle class people, like many of us here, lived typically, and especially landscape architects, into their 70s and 80s, always. Yes, the majority of the people died younger than that because they were living in intolerable conditions. But people who were engaged in activities like we do and lead a way of life similar to ours, that has not changed. I assure you that has not changed in 2,000 years by much. A little bit in the clothing, a little bit in the utensils, a little bit in the other kind of stuff. Thank you.
So we are, I think, at the end of our time here. I want to...
Mr. Motti wants to say something.
Go ahead.
No, actually, I was out of the session because of some instability in connection. I just wanted to say thank you and actually very much enjoyed this event today.
So thank you to Victor Motti, and thank you to the other panelists. Two things. One is I want to welcome those of you who came from the beauty panel. You are now in the future panel. And those of you who are in this panel, the future, there's a survey in the chat. So please take a moment to fill it out. And I want to thank you for joining and for this nice discussion.
you.